They said the man who vanished 50 years ago took his secret to the grave. But they were wrong, because the first thing my dog did when we stepped into that $500 cabin was stare at the walls like someone trapped inside was still begging to be found. And by the time I realized Atlas wasn't sensing danger, but a truth frozen under the ice, it was already too late to walk away. The snow was coming in sideways when Cal Rourke rolled into Bitter Ridge, Colorado. The storm didn't fall so much as it attacked, slicing across the windshield in white sheets that erased the world every few seconds. Cal had driven through worse in his former life, but there was something about mountain storms that felt personal, like they knew the shape of your bones and pressed right where you remembered pain. Atlas sat in the passenger seat, tall and still, his amber eyes tracking the shadows beyond the glass. Every few breaths, the dog's ears flicked towards the tree line, as if he could hear something buried beneath the wind. Cal turned off the engine outside the courthouse annex. The clock on the dash blinked red through the frost. He opened the door and the cold bit deep, sliding straight through flannel, through scar tissue, through memory. Atlas jumped down with the quiet precision only a trained canine carried, his paws barely breaking the snow's surface. Inside, warmth didn't soften the mood. It only made the room feel smaller. Damp coats, stale coffee, old wood. A few locals were gathered for the auction, their shoulders hunched, their eyes avoiding anything that might matter. They barely glanced up at Cal. The ones who did looked away fast, like naming him might summon responsibility. The auctioneer rattled through the list. Old tractors, rusted tools, a salvage trailer. Then came the final lot, a foreclosed cabin on the North Ridge. Parcel number 7C, locals call it the Blue Hollow Place, condition poor, no plumbing, no power, last assessed occupancy 1974. A quiet settled over the room. Not peaceful, tense. Cal raised his hand. It felt less like bidding and more like volunteering for a job no one else wanted. 500, the auctioneer said. Anyone for 6? Nothing. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. It wasn't indifference. It was fear wearing the shape of politeness. The gavel cracked the table. Sold, and every head in the room turned toward Cal with the same silent warning. Not a threat, a plea. Don't stay. Don't dig. Atlas shifted beside him, muscles tightening under his winter coat. The dog felt it too. Whatever hung in that room was older than rumor. When they stepped back into the snow, the storm had started to ease. A softer fall, almost cautious. Cal hit the hardware store for supplies. The old man behind the counter didn't bother hiding the way he studied Cal's face. You bought the cabin near the ice cave. His voice landed like he was handing over a folded flag. That place was supposed to stay empty. Cal kept his tone even. Empty places don't bother me. The man didn't blink. Blue Hollow keeps what it wants. Cal didn't answer. Some beliefs didn't need arguing. The road to the cabin was more suggestion than route. Snowdrifts swallowed tire tracks. Pines crowded the old logging trail until it felt like driving through a throat that might close at any moment. When the cabin came into view, it looked half submerged in winter, roof bowed under weight, porch sagging, windows black as sealed caves. Atlas didn't get out right away. He stood in the truck bed, staring past the cabin toward the woods. Not scanning. Fixated, as though something on the wind was calling him by name. Inside the cabin, the cold hit like a held breath finally released. One room, one table, one narrow bed. A wool coat still hung by the door as if its owner meant to come back for it. Dust coated everything except the stone wall on the far side, built from river rock gone pale with age. Atlas walked straight to it. He didn't sniff around the room, didn't map the space like he always did. He went directly to the stone wall and locked in place, tail lowered, chest lifted, nose inches from the rock. Cal closed the door quietly. The air felt wrong, not haunted, watched. Atlas's body shifted, one tense line from nose to tail. Then he lifted a paw and tapped the stone once. The message landed cold in Cal's spine. Atlas didn't touch things unless he meant it. Cal crouched beside him. "What do you smell?" Atlas didn't look at him. His ears pressed back, eyes tunneling on one particular stone. It sat lower than the rest, rectangular where others were rounded, and frost had formed along its edges even though the rest of the wall was dry. Cal brushed his fingers over the surface. It wasn't cold like mountain stone. It was cold like something alive beneath it was stealing heat away. Outside, the wind dropped for a moment. A strange silence pooled through the cabin. Heavy, expectant. Then Atlas did something he hadn't done since Afghanistan, since the winter ambush that took their entire unit. He stepped back, pressed against Cal's leg, and released a low, rising growl that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't fear. It was warning. Cal looked at the stone again, and a small, almost impossible detail emerged in the lantern light. A sliver of blue, faint but unmistakable, glowing from a hairline crack along the base. Blue light, the same shade that pulsed inside the ice cave when the sun hit it. Something under that wall was connected to Blue Hollow. Cal's pulse sharpened. Atlas's growl deepened, steady, unwavering. The stone wasn't just loose, it had been sealed, and whatever was behind it hadn't been touched in decades. Atlas stared at the wall as if waiting for it to breathe. And for the first time since Cal arrived in Bitter Ridge, the storm outside didn't feel like the most dangerous thing in the valley. Something older was waiting under the cabin, and Atlas had already heard it. Cal spent the morning repairing what little could be fixed. The roof leaked in 3 places. The floor dipped as if the earth below had shifted. The windows whistled with every passing gust. He patched what he could, knowing full well the cabin needed more than repairs. It needed a reason to stand. Atlas did not help. He barely moved. He stayed anchored beside the stone wall, the exact same spot he had chosen the night before. His gaze tracked every breath the cabin took. If Cal stepped too far from the room, Atlas's ears twitched, his attention snapping back to the wall as if it were whispering beneath the surface. Cal tried calling him once. Atlas ignored him. That alone was enough to raise the hairs on Cal's neck. Atlas never ignored him. Not in war, not in storms, not ever. By late afternoon, the light outside dimmed into the grey haze of incoming weather. Cal set down the hammer, wiped his hands on his jeans, and finally walked to where Atlas sat guard. "You're acting like you've seen this before," he said quietly. Atlas didn't blink. His chest rose in slow, controlled breaths, the posture of a dog listening for something beneath normal sound. It reminded Cal of a different cold, a different silence. A memory broke open without warning. Snow collapsing, the weight of it hitting like a falling building. The muffled screams of men buried alive under a storm of white. The blinding shock of impact. The horrifying stillness after. And Atlas, years younger then, digging with frozen paws and bleeding pads, refusing to leave Cal's side as they clawed their way out. Every other man in the unit had been swallowed that day. All except Cal. All except the dog who refused to die. The cabin creaked as if answering the memory. Cal blinked hard, grounding himself in the present. He wasn't in Afghanistan. He was here, in Bitter Ridge, in a cabin that breathed colder air than the storm outside. He knelt beside Atlas and brushed a hand along the dog's back. The muscles were tight, vibrating with the kind of readiness only a canine carried when something was wrong. "What do you hear?" Atlas finally moved. He lowered his head until his nose touched the mortar line along the lower stone. Then he released a sound Cal hadn't heard since that avalanche mission, A deep, resonant growl that started low in the dog's ribs and rolled through the floorboards. The same sound Atlas had given right before the buried explosive detonated under the snow years ago. The sound that had saved Cal's life once already. Cal leaned in. The wall looked ordinary, weathered, unremarkable. But his breath fogged around the base of the rock in a strange way, drifting sideways before rising, as if cold air was leaking from inside. Inside. Cal stood quickly, the thought landing harder than he intended. Atlas remained locked in the same position, but his growl softened into a steady rumble, a warning without urgency. Not immediate threat, but presence. Something is in there, Cal whispered. Atlas's tail lowered, heavy with meaning. Cal pressed his fingertips against the cold stone. The temperature felt unnatural, even for a mountain cabin. Old cold, ancient cold. A cold that had survived years without melting, without shifting, without being disturbed. He stepped back, grabbed the small flashlight from the table, and shone it across the mortar lines. Most joints were rough from age, cracked in places. But the one Atlas fixated on was smooth, darker, almost polished. Someone sealed this. The wind outside picked up, rattling the shutters. Snow tapped against the glass like impatient fingers. Cal moved to check the window facing the tree line, and something flickered between the pines. A quick glint, a reflection. Not from ice, not from storm. Glass, as if someone out there held binoculars. Cal's pulse steadied, not from fear, but from the clarity he had not felt in years. He stepped away from the window slowly so his shadow wouldn't give him away. Atlas followed with his eyes but didn't budge from the wall. Plot twist came quiet but sharp. Someone had been watching the cabin. Not for Cal, for whatever was hidden inside. He waited a full minute before checking again. Nothing. The pines stood stiff and innocent. Snow drifted softly, but the unease had rooted itself. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, Atlas now pacing back and forth along the wall, unable to settle. Every few steps, the dog would pause and press his nose towards the stone, tail low, breath sharp. Cal understood that behavior. It was the same instinct Atlas used to detect underground voids, buried caches, hidden entrances. Atlas didn't guess. He knew. Night fell early and heavy. Cal lit a fire, though the warmth refused to touch the far wall. Atlas positioned himself again in front of it, sitting like a sentinel made of muscle and memory. Around midnight, the temperature in the cabin dropped suddenly, as if a door had opened somewhere deep inside the earth. The flame in the fireplace bent sideways, pulled towards the stone wall. Atlas stood. His growl rose again, deeper this time. He stepped closer until his paw brushed the mortar line. Then he froze. Every muscle in his body locked. His ears pointed straight ahead. His eyes widened with recognition. Cal had seen that exact expression once, right before his unit found the body of a missing soldier, preserved under a glacier shelf, untouched for months. Atlas wasn't reacting to danger now. He was reacting to something old, something human. Cal whispered the thought he didn't want to believe. There's someone behind that wall. Atlas's growl shifted into a trembling whine, low and mournful, the kind he made only when he found a fallen comrade. Cal felt the room tilt, the truth pressing in. Whatever was hidden inside the stone wasn't just cold. It carried the silence of decades. And Atlas had heard it breathing. Atlas struck first. His paw raked across the lower mortar line with sudden force, claws scraping stone in a sharp, decisive motion. It wasn't random. It was a surgical strike, the way he used to alert Cal to buried ordnance overseas. Cal dropped to one knee beside him, aiming the flashlight along the seam. That was when he saw it. A hairline crack no wider than a thread running vertically through one rectangular stone. Frost clung to its edges, but not the kind formed by tonight's storm. This was older, sharp, mineral blue, the kind of cold that lived decades before Cal ever set foot in Bitter Ridge. Atlas leaned down and inhaled, nostrils flaring wide. His entire posture shifted, the quiet certainty of a K9 who had confirmed something hidden. Then he sat, spine straight, head high, giving Cal the same warning signal he once used in the mountains outside Kabul. Human scent. Old, sealed, and dangerous to disturb without care. Outside, the wind whipped past the cabin in a long, low sweep. But the sound wasn't the usual moan of winter. It carried a different tone, a hollow resonance that echoed from the direction of Blue Hollow Ice Cave. It rose and fell like someone whispering beneath layers of frozen earth. Cal aimed the flashlight again, this time pressing his palm against the stone. It was frigid, more than frigid. It felt like touching a freezer door that had never been opened. The cold radiated outward in a steady pulse that did not match the room temperature at all. This wasn't a draft. This was containment. He stepped back, grabbed his pry bar, and wedged it into the lowest edge of the stone. The bar didn't budge at first. Then a crack echoed through the cabin, brittle and dry. Tiny flakes of ice drifted from the seam, catching the beam of the flashlight like falling shards of glass. Atlas stiffened. His breath hitched, his ears pressed forward hard. Whatever lay behind that stone was waking to the disturbance. Cal adjusted his grip and pushed again. This time the stone shifted half an inch. A small jet of frigid air shot outward. Cal recoiled instinctively. The temperature drop hit him like a slap. It was colder than the storm outside, colder than anything natural. Atlas let out a sharp bark. Cal froze. Atlas didn't bark without reason. It was as clear a signal as a tripwire pulled. Cal steadied himself and pushed the stone free. It slid out with a dull thud, revealing a narrow opening behind it. The space beyond wasn't dirt or timber. It was ice. Thick layers pressed into unnatural shapes, their edges smooth as glass, their centers glowing faintly with the same pale blue that filled Blue Hollow's deepest chambers. A hidden passage, carved by nature, sealed by time, and fed by the breath of the ice cave. Cal leaned closer, breath fogging the air. The opening extended downward at an angle, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. More importantly, someone had reinforced it. There were tool marks along the ice. Chisel strokes, hammer dents frozen in place. Someone had worked to open this passage, and someone else had worked even harder to seal it again. Atlas crouched, placing his nose near the entrance. He inhaled once, twice. Then he jerked back, shook his head and sat down hard, posture rigid. Warning. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Something inside carried a scent he understood on instinct. Cal could feel his heart pounding against his ribs. He lowered the flashlight into the opening. The beam cut down the icy tunnel, revealing a faint trail of frost, disturbed in small patches. As if someone had moved through here once, then vanished. A sudden crack split the air. Cal jerked back. A line of frost was creeping along the cabin floor, extending from the opening like a cold vine escaping its roots. The fire in the hearth sputtered, its flame bending sharply toward the hidden passage as if drawn by suction. Atlas growled, deep and primal, stepping between Cal and the opening. Cal swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. "What is it, boy?" Atlas didn't look at him. His gaze stayed on the passage, his body low, muscles wired. Another crack. Louder this time. The cabin wall trembled. Cal moved forward, gripping the flashlight tight. The icy layer inside the passage suddenly fractured, splitting into jagged shards that shimmered like crystal. A narrow object jutted through the break, the metal edge frosted solid. Cal reached in carefully and pulled it free. A metal canister, old, cold, sealed, stamped with a faded date, 1974, and a name scratched roughly into the steel, H. Pierce. Cal's stomach dropped. Harlan Pierce, the environmental researcher who vanished near Blue Hollow almost 50 years ago. Atlas released a single bark. Loud, urgent. Then Cal heard it too. Footsteps outside. Slow, heavy, intentional. Someone was approaching the cabin in the storm. Atlas spun toward the door, hackles raised. Cal killed the flashlight and moved silently to the window. Through the frost-coated glass he saw a dark figure standing at the tree line, half hidden by drifting snow. Watching. Not moving. Not speaking. The figure stepped backward and disappeared into the woods without leaving a trail. Cal grabbed Atlas's collar before the dog could lunge for the door. The cabin fell dead silent again, except for the faint hum of wind seeping through the ice passage. Cal looked at the canister in his hand. Someone had sealed Pierce's work. Someone had buried a part of the ice cave under this cabin, and someone was still watching to make sure it stayed buried. Atlas nudged the canister once, then stared back at the gaping, blue-lit opening in the wall. He didn't need words. The message was in his eyes, cold and steady. Whatever is down there was never meant to be found. But they were already too late. Cal worked in silence, the kind that made the air feel tight around his ribs. He grabbed the thermal chisel from his gear bag, a tool he hadn't used since search and rescue training, and clicked on the narrow beam of its heating edge. The light cut through the cold with a soft hiss. Atlas stood behind him, head low, weight shifted forward, ready to move at the slightest change in the air. The first strike sent a web of cracks across the ice. It didn't break like normal frost. It fractured in thin, glass-like sheets that slipped down the tunnel with a distant echo, as if falling deeper than the space beneath the cabin should allow. Cal pushed farther, widening the opening until he could crouch inside. Cold wrapped around him, colder than the storm outside, colder than the deepest nights in Afghanistan. This was the chill of isolation layered over decades. Atlas nosed his shoulder once, urging him on. Cal slid down the narrow incline. His boots hit solid ground after a few feet. He lifted the light, and the beam settled on a small chamber carved directly into the earth, reinforced by ice walls that glowed faintly with the same blue hue as the Blue Hollow cave. The room looked untouched by time, preserved by nature and secrecy. 3 items sat neatly in the center: a frost-resistant steel box, a leather-bound journal, and a folded hand-drawn map, yellowed at the edges but perfectly preserved by the cold. Cal knelt, breath fogging as he turned the journal over. The name stamped across the front hit him like a jolt. Harlan Pierce, the scientist who vanished in 1974. No trace, no remains, no answers. Until now. Atlas circled the small room slowly, each step deliberate. His ears flicked toward a corner Cal hadn't noticed yet. A narrow shelf carved into the ice. On it sat a plastic case sealed with old electrical tape, its edges frosted over. A cassette. Atlas stopped directly in front of it and sat down hard. Cal reached for the case, but something in Atlas's posture made him hesitate. The dog wasn't afraid. He was alert in a way that went beyond instinct, as if whatever was inside that tape didn't just smell old, it smelled wrong. Cal lifted the case carefully, and the frost melted under his warm fingers just enough to reveal a hand-written label scrawled across the top. If found, do not trust the county. A strange pressure filled the room, a conviction that had weight. Something Harlan Pierce had been desperate to communicate. Cal looked back at the journal. The edges of the pages were curled with age, but the ink was crisp. Pierce's handwriting was rigid, almost hurried. The first page was a mix of field notes and personal warnings. He had been tracking geological anomalies around the Blue Hollow Cave, readings that didn't match any known environmental behavior. Cal flipped to the second entry. Pierce described discovering a vent deep inside the cave that expelled bursts of hyper-chilled air capable of freezing water vapor instantly. Something old and unstable, something he had warned could be exploited if found by the wrong people. And someone found it. Atlas shifted suddenly. His head snapped toward the tunnel entrance. He growled. Once, a short, clipped warning. Cal held his breath. A faint sound echoed down the ice passage. Snow shifting. A boot scraping outside the cabin. Slow. Testing weight. Someone was above them. Cal snapped the light off. Darkness folded in instantly. Atlas pressed against his leg, unmoving, but coiled tight like a spring. Seconds passed. The sound above faded again. Whoever was there hadn't found the entrance. Not yet. Cal turned on the light to its lowest setting, then reached for the steel box. He pried it open and found more evidence inside. Old photographs of the cave entrance marked with red arrows. Sample vials. A typed report referencing thermal extraction patents belonging to a mining company that dissolved in 1981 under suspicious circumstances. Pierce had uncovered something bigger than environmental science. He had uncovered a secret the county wanted buried. Cal sealed everything back into the box, except the journal, the map, and the cassette tape. He kept those close. Atlas nudged the tape again. His nose wrinkled at the scent. Cal whispered, "You think he recorded something important?" Atlas sat taller, breath steady. Cal scanned the chamber one last time before climbing the incline. When he lifted himself back into the cabin, the warm air hit his face like a slap. He leaned out of the tunnel and watched Atlas emerge, fur dusted with blue ice crystals that shimmered faintly before melting into water. Cal slid the stone back into place loosely, just enough to conceal the passage from casual eyes. The cold leaking from the tunnel thinned but didn't disappear entirely. The cabin seemed to exhale, like it had been holding this secret for too long. He set everything on the table. The cassette tape felt heavier than it should, like it carried the last breath of a dying man. Cal looked at Atlas. "What do you think the county did to him?" Atlas's gaze stayed on the tape, unwavering. Then outside, a new sound broke the quiet. Not wind, not snow. An engine turning over, a vehicle pulling away from the cabin. Someone had been watching. Someone had waited. And someone did not want Harlan Pierce's voice to be heard. Cal closed his hand around the tape and felt the tension rise like a tide. The storm outside had been loud, but this silence was louder. Atlas moved to the door and planted himself there, a sentry in the half-light. Cal knew that posture. They had crossed a threshold. And whatever truth was frozen under this cabin had just started to thaw. Cal read the journal by the weak glow of the lantern, each page tightening the air inside the cabin. Harlan Pierce's handwriting grew more frantic as the entries went on, the neat lines dissolving into sharp angles. The scientist had not only discovered something unusual in Blue Hollow, he had discovered something lethal. Entry after entry described the same anomaly. A vent deep inside the ice cave that released bursts of hyper-chilled vapor carrying suspended particles unlike anything Pierce had ever studied. When exposed to warm air, the particles vaporized into a gas capable of disrupting neural pathways in animals. Birds lost their sense of direction. Coyotes wandered in circles until they collapsed. Even humans showed signs of disorientation if they stayed too close to the vent for more than minutes. Cal felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with the cold. If exploited, Pierce had written, the gas could interfere with cognition, decision-making, even memory. A naturally occurring weapon. A Cold War dream. Cal turned the page. That is when the company arrived. Pierce described men claiming to be from a regional energy group, but their questions were too specific, too rehearsed. They wanted access to his samples, his research, his cave. When he refused, zoning citations appeared on his property overnight. Tax discrepancies, accusations of trespassing on federal land he had surveyed for years. "They are not trying to stop my research," Pierce wrote. "They are trying to bury me with paper until someone quieter can take my place." Cal leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. He knew that kind of slow violence. Bureaucracy used like a scalpel, it left no blood but cut deeper than any blade. Atlas shifted from his place near the door. His ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. A deep rumble started low in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Atlas moved to the window, pressing his nose against the glass. His breath fogged a small circle in the frost. Then he looked back at Cal with an urgency that made Cal's skin crawl. Cal stepped outside with a flashlight and scanned the snow. The beam caught something immediately. Tracks, fresh, leading from the tree line toward the cabin. Heavy boots, wide gait. Someone who moved with purpose, not hesitation. Then the trail stopped abruptly 6 yards out, swallowed by blowing snow as if the person had simply vanished. Cal knelt and touched the indent. The edges were crisp, minutes old. Someone had been watching again. He returned inside, locking the door behind him. Atlas shadowed him, breathing faster now, caught between warning and readiness. The dog kept glancing toward the hidden passage behind the stone, as if the danger outside was connected to whatever lay frozen beneath them. Cal opened another journal entry. The handwriting had changed. More hurried, less structured. I saw them at the cave. They had equipment I didn't recognize, tanks, cables, something designed to harness the vapor. They say it is for geothermal energy. They lie. Cal flipped the page. I confronted the county office. They told me to stop digging. They told me the cave was no longer mine to study. Someone at the top signed an order to remove my permits. My supervisor said it was for my safety. Another line was underlined 3 times. If they get control of the vent, this valley will not recover. People will not understand why they are sick, why their minds slip, why memory shifts. Cal felt a cold sweat break across his shoulders. He looked at Atlas, who stood motionless now, gaze fixed on the cassette tape lying beside the journal. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off it since Cal found it. Cal whispered, "You think he recorded what he saw, don't you?" Atlas blinked once, slow, certain. Cal opened the steel box again and found more evidence. Letters Pierce had never sent. Lab notes, temperature data. And the most damning piece, a folded invoice stamped confidential from a defense contractor no one in Bitter Ridge would dare mention by name. They had paid for extraction prototypes. They had paid for silence. Cal closed the box, breath shallow. This wasn't abandoned research. This wasn't a man lost in the snow. This was a man hunted for discovering something he was never meant to find. A sharp crack echoed outside. Atlas lunged toward the door, barking once, loud and explosive, the kind of bark that detonated adrenaline in Cal's veins. Cal snatched his rifle and moved to the window. Another footprint appeared near the tree line. Someone was circling the cabin. Not approaching. Watching. Cal whispered, "They want to see how much I've found." Atlas stood rigid, ears pinned forward, tail stiff as rebar. He let out a low growl that vibrated the floorboards. Cal backed away from the window and looked again at the journal. Pierce's final entry was short. "I hear someone outside. I think they found the passage. If I cannot reach the cave, this will have to be enough. Do not trust the county." The words tapered off, ending in an unfinished sentence as if he had been pulled away mid-thought. Cal closed the journal gently. His throat felt tight. This wasn't just a missing person case. It wasn't just buried science. Someone had built a secret under this cabin. Someone had died protecting it. And whoever had come tonight wasn't guarding the past. They were guarding a weapon no one was supposed to survive. Atlas stepped closer to Cal, leaning into him, steady but tense. His eyes held the truth Cal already felt in his bones. They were no longer alone in Bitter Ridge. And whatever hunted Harlan, Pierce had just decided Cal Rourke was next. The knock came just after noon, sharp and deliberate, the kind that didn't belong to a neighbor or a lost hiker. Cal wiped the frost off the window and saw a man standing on the porch wearing a deputy jacket that looked a little too new for Bitter Ridge. The badge on his chest glinted, but not in a way Cal trusted. Atlas was already at the door. His stance was rigid, ears pinned forward, a low vibration building in his throat. Cal opened the door halfway. The man smiled with the wrong part of his face. His eyes stayed cold. "Afternoon. Folks call me Deputy Sloan, just making rounds, checking in on new property owners. Bitter Ridge likes to know who's living in its bones." Cal didn't step aside. He didn't invite him in. Something about the man's boots bothered him. No snow on them, no moisture, as if he'd come from a heated car straight to the porch, not from a patrol through the woods. "What do you need, Deputy?" Cal asked. Sloane's gaze drifted past Cal's shoulder into the cabin. It lingered on the floorboards near the stone wall. Too long. Too curious. Just wanted to know if you found anything unusual on the property. Old cabins like this sometimes have sealed rooms, forgotten crawl spaces. People stash things, documents, equipment. Atlas stepped between them, shoulders squared, teeth showing now. A warning. If Sloane noticed, he didn't show it, but his fingers twitched near his belt. "Beautiful dog you got," Sloane said quietly. "Military, right?" Cal didn't answer. Sloane's smile thinned. "If you happen to uncover any old passages, you let the county know. Some places are safer when left alone." Cal felt it then. The phrase. The same tone written in Pierce's journal 50 years earlier. He shut the door without another word. Sloane didn't knock again. He simply stood there for a moment, letting the cold seep between the cracks, then walked away with a gait that wasn't quite patrol officer, wasn't quite civilian. Something rehearsed. Something trained. Atlas growled long after footsteps faded. "You felt it too, boy," Cal whispered. The lie. Night came fast. Snow drifted sideways, whispering against the roof like sandpaper. Cal double-checked the latches, the rifles, the generator. Atlas followed him room to room, restless, never settling. Every few minutes he would stop and face the stone wall, ears pointed, body tense. He knows, Cal thought. He knows someone else is coming for what's hidden under this cabin. The break-in happened just before midnight. A sharp crack of wood, the back window. Atlas leapt before Cal even processed the sound. A blur of muscle and instinct, Atlas crashed into the dark figure climbing through the frame. The intruder let out a choked cry as the dog's weight pinned him to the floor. Cal swung the rifle up, the lantern light cutting across the chaos. The man wore black gear, heavy gloves, and a mask designed for cold extraction work, not burglary. The kind industrial contractors used when handling chemical vapors. Cal grabbed the man's collar and yanked. The mask fell slightly, revealing a faded logo on the sleeve of his jacket. Polar Ridge Energy, a company dissolved in 1980, a name Pierce had written multiple times in his journal. Cal felt ice crawl up his spine. "You're 50 years too late to hide this," Cal said through his teeth. The intruder snarled and tried to reach into his vest. Atlas was faster. He clamped down on the man's forearm with terrifying precision, dragging him sideways before the weapon could clear the holster. The man screamed, tried to strike back, but Atlas held him there, unmoving, jaws locked. Cal ripped the vest open. Inside were tools, cold drills, sealant tubes, a map of the cabin with the hidden passage circled twice. They already knew. Another crash sounded from outside. Not the wind. Boots. More of them. Cal killed the lantern instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. He could hear only breathing, Atlas's growl, the heavy thud of someone testing the back door. Then a voice outside. Low. Not Sloane's, but controlled, commanding. Don't damage the interior. We need the chamber intact. Cal's pulse hammered in his ears. They weren't just trying to steal something. They were trying to repair it, reopen it, use it. Atlas released the intruder just long enough to shove him toward Cal. Cal struck him across the temple with the butt of the rifle. The man dropped, silent. The back door rattled harder. Cal dragged the unconscious body toward the stone wall, out of sight. Atlas stayed by his side, breathing hard but focused. A second voice outside said, Sloane said he cracked the seal. It's open now. Finish the job. Cal closed his eyes for one split second. Deputy Sloane wasn't law enforcement. He was the guard dog of a 50-year-old crime. Cal grabbed Atlas by the collar and whispered, Stay with me. The dog pressed his forehead against Cal's leg. A vow. The door hinges snapped. Snow blasted inward. Two silhouettes entered, scanning fast with low red lights meant not to reflect off ice. Cal waited until they stepped fully inside. He and Atlas moved as one. Atlas launched first, slamming into the nearest intruder with a force that shook the floor. Cal fired once, grazing the second man's shoulder and driving him backward into the doorframe. The cabin filled with chaos, shouts, the scrape of boots on wood. Then something unexpected happened. The second man froze. Not in fear, in recognition. He saw the open passage behind the stone, the crack of cold vapor still drifting from its edges. His face drained. He dropped his weapon. Wait, he whispered. You don't understand. We're not here to kill you. Cal kept the rifle trained on him. Atlas growled so deeply the boards vibrated. The man raised both hands slowly. We're here to finish what Pierce started. We were part of his team. We tried to expose the company decades ago. They buried us along with him. You found the chamber. That means you found the journal, the tape. Cal didn't lower the rifle. Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow again. More people approaching. Atlas turned toward the door, barking once, sharp and explosive. Cal thought quickly. If what the man said was true, the real threat hadn't entered yet. Deputy Sloane and whoever he worked for weren't here to retrieve old science. They were here to erase witnesses. All of them. Cal locked eyes with the intruder still standing. For the first time, he saw real fear there. Not of Cal, not of Atlas, but of the men coming behind him. If you want to live, Cal said quietly, you're going to help me fight them off. The man nodded slowly. And Atlas? The dog didn't move, didn't blink. He already understood. The secret under the cabin hadn't just survived 50 winters. It was ready to be fought, for again. The entrance to Blue Hollow Ice Cave breathed cold like a living thing, a pulse of ancient air pushing outward with each gust. Cal tightened the straps on his pack and checked the lantern battery. Atlas stood beside him, perfectly still, nose angled toward the darkness. His breath fogged in thin white bursts, each one sharper than the last. He was ready before Cal even took the first step. They followed Harlan Pierce's hand-drawn map, laminated long ago and yellowed with time. The lines were shaky, drawn under stress, but the path was unmistakable. Every few yards, Atlas stopped, sniffed, and adjusted their course by inches, as though he could sense the residue of what had happened here 50 years earlier. Blue Hollow wasn't a cave in the normal sense. It was a frozen cathedral. Sheets of ice curved above them like ribs, glowing faintly blue with reflected light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The deeper they walked, the thicker the silence became, until even their own footsteps sounded muffled under the weight of centuries. Atlas paused near a narrow bend. His entire body stiffened. You smell it, don't you? Cal whispered. Atlas didn't respond. He simply moved ahead, slower now, as though the ice itself was speaking in cues only he understood. Cal recognized the sensation creeping up his spine. Not fear, anticipation. The kind that comes right before stepping into a memory not your own. 100 yards in, the map showed a sharp descent. Harlan had marked it with a small note. Dangerous. Only if necessary, which meant he'd taken it. Cal knelt and aimed the lantern downward. The slope was a frozen slide, slick and treacherous. Atlas leaned over the edge and released a low chuff, part warning, part insistence. We go together, Cal said. He lowered himself first, boots searching for traction. The ice resisted him, slick and unforgiving. Atlas followed with an agility born from instinct rather than training, claws finding purchase Cal could not. The descent ended at a narrow ledge that opened into a vast cavern below. Cal felt his breath stop. Suspended inside the chamber were stalactites made entirely of translucent blue ice, some longer than telephone poles, glowing from trapped air bubbles and ancient minerals. They hung over a frozen floor so clear it looked like glass. But it wasn't the beauty that froze Cal where he stood. It was the structure at the center. A small research outpost, half buried in frost, sealed perfectly in ice as if time had paused mid-breath. Metal panels covered in rime, a collapsed antenna, wires frozen in looping shapes, a door frozen shut. Atlas approached cautiously, nose inches from the metal. His posture changed, shoulders lowered, head down. A reverence Cal had only seen him show at military memorials. Cal brushed frost off the side panel. U.S. Geological Survey, 1974. This was Harlan Pierce's field lab. The door resisted when he pulled on it, ice holding it hostage. He used the butt of the lantern to break the frost around the hinges. The crack echoed through the cavern like a rifle shot. Finally, the door gave. Inside, the air had a stillness Cal had only felt around the dead. A single figure sat slumped in a metal chair, body encased in a frozen suit designed for Arctic conditions. Frost sealed the visor, but Cal didn't need to see the face. The posture told the story. Harlan Pierce had died sitting upright, guarding whatever he held. Atlas stepped closer, nose trembling as he sniffed the frozen man. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply bowed his head. Cal swallowed as he noticed Harlan's stiffened fingers still clutching a journal. The last journal. The missing link. It took Cal several minutes to work the book free without damaging the frozen remains. As soon as he did, something small clattered onto the ice beside the chair. A military-grade tape recorder, fully intact, sealed in a plastic sleeve. Cal picked it up slowly. He recognized the model instantly. He'd used one during special operations training years ago. Rugged, weatherproof, built to survive anything except direct sabotage. He wiped the frost and saw a label written in shaky black ink. Blue Hollow. Last entry. Atlas backed up suddenly. His tail stiffened, and he released a deep, guttural growl that rolled across the chamber. "What is it?" Cal whispered. Atlas's gaze fixed on the far wall. At first, Cal didn't see anything. Then he noticed the gouges. Dozens of them. Deep scratches carved into the ice as though someone had clawed at it with desperate strength. Some were old, some newer. Cal felt the air tighten around them. He pressed play on the recorder. Static. Then a voice. Harlan Pierce's voice. If someone is hearing this, then I didn't make it out. They found the vent. They want it for military contracts. They're trying to force me to map the deepest tunnels. I told them the gas is unstable. They don't care. A loud crash interrupted the recording. Heavy footsteps. Multiple men shouting, "Open the hatch!" "He's in there." Pierce gasped, close to the microphone now. "They're sealing the exits." They want me to die in this cave so they can claim I disappeared. Tell my daughter I didn't run. I fought this until the end. Please!" Another sound. Not human. A resonance. A pulse of air like the cave itself exhaled. The gas vent, Cal realized. Pierce coughed violently, voice fading. "If they weaponize this, don't trust the county. Don't trust—" Silence. Then the recorder clicked off. Atlas turned in a slow circle, positioning himself between Cal and every possible tunnel entrance. His hackles were fully raised now. He wasn't reacting to the recording. He was reacting to something real, something moving in the cavern. Cal knelt beside him. "Easy, boy. Stay with me." Atlas didn't blink. His eyes tracked a shadow sliding across the distant wall of ice. Cal raised the lantern higher, and the truth hit him like a blow. The scratches on the wall weren't from Harlan Pierce. They were from someone trying to break into the lab. Recently. Cal exhaled, breath trembling. "We're not alone down here." Atlas responded with a low, lethal growl. Not fear, recognition. Whatever had chased Harlan Pierce into the cave hadn't died with him. It had followed the same secrets. And now it had followed Cal and Atlas into the heart of Blue Hollow. The storm had turned vicious by the time Cal and Atlas emerged from the ice chamber, the wind screaming through the mouth of Blue Hollow like a warning carved into air. Snow hammered sideways, reducing the world to a furious blur of white and shadows. Cal pulled his hood tight and pushed forward, Atlas at his heel, his head low, muscles taut as bowstrings. They didn't make it 20 yards before Atlas stopped dead. Cal froze. "What is it?" The dog didn't answer with sound. He answered by shifting his body an inch to the left, blocking Cal's path just as a muted click echoed beneath the storm. A second later, the hillside to their right erupted in flame. The cabin was burning. Cal's breath turned to ice in his throat. Flames punched upward through the roof, orange against the blue-white storm. The fire was too deliberate, too fast. This wasn't lightning or a misplaced ember. Someone had soaked the cabin in accelerant and waited for them to leave. Through the veil of blowing snow, dark shapes moved near the porch. Men in heavy coats, hoods cinched tight, flashlights sweeping the snow. They were organized. They were expecting him. One of them shouted over the wind. A short phrase. Military cadence. Atlas reacted instantly, teeth bared, body coiling to launch. Cal knelt fast, gripping his harness. "Not yet. We don't win this head-on." Atlas trembled, torn between instinct and command. But he stayed. Good dog. Now move. They darted back toward the ice cave's wall, using its shadows for cover. Another explosion shook the ridge, showering the clearing with debris. The men were destroying evidence, erasing anything Harlan Pierce had hidden. And they thought Cal was still inside, which meant they planned on leaving nothing alive. A bullet stitched the snow by Cal's boots. Another cracked against the ice near Atlas's shoulder. Cal spun behind a jutting ridge and steadied his breath. "We need the tunnels," he whispered. Atlas didn't wait for a second order. He bolted into the cave, paws hammering against frozen ground. Cal followed, lantern whipping light against the cavern walls. The blue glow deepened as they descended, storm noise fading behind them. But they weren't alone. Boots hit the ice above. Echoes shot down the tunnels. 3, maybe 4 men. They were entering the cavern. They knew the map. Cal cursed under his breath. That meant someone in the old county office had given them the layout. Harlan's notes hadn't just been compromised. They'd been hunted. Atlas slowed, tail straight, ears pricked. He angled toward the narrow secondary tunnel they'd used earlier, but a fresh crack in the ice stopped him. Cal aimed the lantern. The passage had taken damage. Part of the ceiling sagged with dangerous weight. "We can't go that way." Atlas growled softly. Behind them, voices grew louder. Cal could make out specific words now. "Find the dog. Kill the man. Atlas's body dropped into a protective stance. Cal touched his neck. "No, not here. They'll corner us." He scanned the cavern. The main tunnel was a death trap. The secondary was collapsing. They needed something else. Something Harlan hadn't drawn. Something instinct could find where logic couldn't. Atlas lifted his head. His nostrils flared once, twice. Then he bolted left into darkness. Cal hesitated for half a heartbeat. The tunnel Atlas chose wasn't on any map. It wasn't even visible until Cal stepped into the beam of the lantern and saw a narrow slit in the ice, no wider than a shoulder. Atlas squeezed through, claws scraping for purchase. Cal inhaled hard and followed, ice ripping at his jacket. Behind them, flashlights cut across the cavern floor. There, they ran left. Cal pressed deeper into the slit, feeling ice snag his sleeves. He moved sideways, ribs brushing frozen walls. The air grew colder, sharper. Atlas guided him by sound more than sight now, soft wafts and taps of claws signaling turns. The tunnel angled downward, then sharply right, then opened into a small chamber that smelled of untouched cold. Atlas turned to Cal. His gaze was focused. Sure, he'd found safety, but only for a moment. A deep rumble rolled through the cave. Cal grabbed the wall as a tremor shuddered beneath their feet. Above them, a crack shot across the ceiling of the main cavern like a gunshot. Snow and ice groaned. They were losing time. Atlas padded toward a thin column of light spilling through a break in the wall. Cal pressed an ear to it and heard wind. A way out. He struck the ice with the butt of the lantern. It fractured. He struck again. The wall split open, and a rush of freezing air sliced into the chamber. Outside lay a steep slope, leading back toward the ridgeline, hidden by snowdrifts and boulders. Cal pushed through and slid down the incline with Atlas bounding beside him. Behind them, a thunderous roar tore through the mountain. The main cavern collapsed, sealing the intruders inside. Snow shot up like a geyser as the ground settled. Cal coughed through the cold mist and looked across the ridge. Flames still swallowed the cabin. Their home was gone. Atlas pressed against him. "It's all right, boy," Cal whispered. "We're still breathing." He reached into his inner jacket and pulled out the waterproof pouch sealed tight against frost. Inside were Harlan's journals, maps, the final tapes. Proof of everything. He took out a burner phone, shielded it from the wind, and typed one name. Lena Ward, investigative reporter, ex-Army. The only person Cal trusted with the truth. He attached a single message. "If this reaches you, the story is real. And it's starting again." He sent it. Atlas sat upright, scanning the ridgeline with quiet, vigilant certainty. Cal put a hand on his shoulder. They came to bury what Harlan found. But we're not done. Atlas's tail thumped once. Not in excitement, in agreement. Together they stepped into the storm, carrying the truth that was never meant to be found. The storm hadn't fully died before the truth began to move. By sunrise the next day, Lena Ward's article was already climbing every national feed. Satellite images of Blue Hollow Ice Cave, photographs of the frozen research station, audio clips from Harlan Pierce's final recording, his voice cracking as he fought to stay alive long enough to leave a warning no one had heard for 50 years. But they heard him now. By noon, major outlets were quoting Lena's first line. "A man the county erased has finally spoken." And then the tide broke. The Department of the Interior issued an emergency bulletin. The EPA opened a federal inquiry. A special task force was dispatched to Bitter Ridge with a list of individuals to question, one of them being a retired county commissioner who had vanished from public life nearly 3 decades earlier. Another was the former head of the now-defunct energy company, whose erased files Lena had resurrected through the tapes Cal delivered. Every one of them had benefited from Harlan Pierce's disappearance. 2 were arrested by evening. The town of Bitter Ridge didn't know how to react at first. Shock, then denial, then something like grief. People who had whispered about Blue Hollow their entire lives finally saw what had haunted their parents and grandparents. The rumors weren't stories. They were cover for a man buried in ice and forgotten by the world that should have protected him. Cal watched it unfold from the ranger station where he and Atlas had been asked to stay for their safety. He didn't feel vindicated. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired, the kind of tired that sinks into bone after carrying someone else's unfinished war. Atlas rested against his leg, finally relaxed enough to sleep, his chest rising in slow, even breaths. He had earned it. A knock at the door pulled Cal from his thoughts. Ranger Elise Halden stepped inside, breath still fogging from the cold. "You should see this," she said. Cal followed her out onto the ridge. A group of townspeople had gathered despite the cold. Some held candles. Others simply stood in silence, staring at the distant mouth of Blue Hollow, now cordoned off by federal agents. The cave glowed under floodlights, its blue shimmer visible even in daylight. One boy pointed toward Cal. "That's him, the man who found the cave. And the dog." Cal felt every pair of eyes shift toward him. Elise raised a hand. "Folks, this is Calvin Rourke, and this is Atlas. Without them, we never would have known what happened to Harlan Pierce." Someone started to clap. It grew, hesitant at first, then rising as more hands joined. Not applause for a hero, applause for a truth finally brought out of the dark. Cal wanted to step back, disappear into the snow, but Atlas moved forward instead. He sat at the front of the crowd, gaze steady, posture proud. The wind tugged at his fur. The world had taken enough from him. Today it would give something back. A reporter from a regional station approached with a camera. "We'd like a statement." Cal shook his head. "Not mine to tell. It belongs to the man in the cave." But the reporter insisted. "You uncovered it." Cal looked down at Atlas. The dog met his eyes with a calm that held decades of instinct and fight. "All right," Cal said softly. "Just one thing." He stepped closer to the microphone. Harlan Pierce didn't die because he got lost. He died because he told the truth. And the truth scares the wrong people. What happened here was buried under snow, silence, and fear. But nothing stays frozen forever. He reached down, placing a hand on Atlas's neck. "And I didn't find any of it. My dog did." The crowd murmured, warmed by the honesty. By late afternoon, an announcement came from Washington. Blue Hollow Ice Cave would be designated a federal conservation area, protected from all commercial development. Harlan Pierce's journals and recordings would be archived at the National Museum of Environmental History. A plaque would be placed at the cave entrance bearing his name. And one more thing. Atlas was to be formally commended for exceptional service in the protection of civilian life. Cal didn't expect the ceremony. He didn't expect the medal, a small bronze emblem shaped like a mountain peak. He didn't expect Atlas to sit perfectly still as officials pinned it to his harness. But he wasn't surprised when Atlas ignored every camera and reporter and instead leaned into Cal's side, resting his head there with simple trust. He never cared about the attention. He cared about the work. Later that evening, Cal returned alone to the edge of the ridge. Snow drifted over the burned remains of his cabin. Only the foundation remained. The wind carried the faint echo of the cave far below. He closed his eyes. "You're clear, Harlan," he whispered. "The world hears you now." Behind him, footsteps crunched lightly. Atlas appeared, nudging his hand with a quiet huff. "Ready to go," Cal murmured. Atlas wagged his tail once. They walked back toward town side by side, man and dog moving through a world no longer frozen in silence. Cal didn't know what came next, but he knew this much. The truth had thawed, and Atlas, as always, had led him to it. 1 year later, winter returned to Bitter Ridge with a softer hand. The storm still carved white scars across the mountains, but the wind no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like memory. Where Cal's first cabin once stood, a new building rose from the snow. Strong beams, reinforced glass, a stone foundation that honored the old one. A sign hung above the door, carved into local pine: Harlan Pierce Memorial Center and Canine Rescue Training Post. Inside, maps of Blue Hollow lined the walls. Harlan's journals rested in glass cases under controlled light. And in the center of the room sat the object that changed everything: the tape recorder, still bearing frost scars from the cave. But the space wasn't a museum. It was a promise. This morning, the promise came alive as a group of middle schoolers shuffled in, boots squeaking on polished wood. Their teacher whispered for them to behave. Most nodded. Some gawked at the frozen lab exhibits. A few stared at the framed photo of Cal and Atlas taken the day Blue Hollow was declared a federal conservation site. Atlas lay near the hearth, fur thick with grey now, but posture steady, eyes bright. He lifted his head when Cal stepped into the room. "You ready?" Cal asked quietly. Atlas thumped his tail once, like always. The kids formed a half circle, their breath fogged faintly in the cold air drifting through the open door. Cal rested a hand on Atlas's neck, feeling the warmth of the dog beneath his palm, the heartbeat that had guided him through storms, through darkness, through the sound of collapsing ice. A girl raised her hand. She was small, with a knitted blue hat and gloves that didn't match. Her voice trembled slightly. Is it true Atlas found the room under the ice when nobody else could? Cal crouched beside the dog. That depends. Do you believe dogs see things we don't? The girl nodded shyly. Then yes, he found it. Another boy jumped in before the teacher could stop him. But how? People searched that place for years. Why him? Cal exhaled slowly, memories flickering across his face like the glow from the hearth. He looked at Atlas. The dog stared back with quiet intelligence, the same gaze he had given Cal the night the cabin burned. He didn't bark for danger, Cal said softly. He barked for the truth, frozen under the ice. The room went still. A few kids leaned forward. One whispered "wow" under his breath. The teacher blinked hard, like she wasn't expecting the weight of the answer. Cal continued. People forget things, or ignore them. Sometimes because it's easier. Sometimes because someone wants them forgotten. But dogs don't lie. They don't fear the wrong things. They don't look away when something's broken. Atlas pressed his head gently into Cal's shoulder, as if confirming every word. Cal smiled. He was never trained to find what we found. He simply refused to leave what didn't feel right. And that led us to a man the world missed for half a century. A hush settled over the group. Even the wind paused outside the window. One girl stepped closer to Atlas and offered her hand. Atlas leaned forward and touched her glove with his nose before settling back into place. The small gesture lit her whole face. The teacher gestured toward a doorway that led to the training yard. These dogs going to help people now? Cal nodded. They already are. Veterans, rescuers, survivors of things too heavy to carry alone. Dogs don't fix grief, but they stand beside it. Sometimes that's enough to bring someone back. The group followed the teacher outside to watch trainees practicing search and rescue drills with new pups. Cal stayed behind for a moment. He knelt beside Atlas again. You know this place is as much yours as anyone's, he murmured. Atlas lifted his chin and let it rest on Cal's knee. Grey or not, tired or not, he was still watching, still guarding. Cal stood and walked to the porch. The mountains stretched before him, blue and white and endless. Snow blew across the ridge like old secrets clearing themselves from the air. When the final group of kids climbed onto the bus, one boy at the back window leaned out and waved. "Thank you, Mr. Rourke. And thank you, Atlas." Atlas raised his head. Just a small movement, but enough. Cal smiled at the quiet gesture. After the bus disappeared down the pass, he sat on the porch steps, Atlas beside him, the dog's tail brushing lightly across the wood. "You think people will remember?" Cal asked. Atlas didn't move. But he didn't need to. Memory is what dogs do best. Cal watched the sky dim, the sun sinking behind frozen peaks. This land had once held a secret so cold it survived half a century. Now it held truth. And truth asked for nothing but to be known. Cal exhaled. If you have a loyal companion at your side, someone who's carried you through storms or stood between you and the dark, then you already understand this story. He glanced toward the distant ice cave, its glow faint in the fading light. So let me ask you something. What's your story with a loyal pet? If you believe in courage on 4 legs, in instinct sharper than fear, in the truth only a dog can find, then join us, support the mission, share the truth, and subscribe to German Shepherd where loyalty lives.